Hello, and welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders, the podcast taking you, the listener, on an auditory road trip across all 50 states while we discuss 50 different murders. Thank you for tuning in to episode 17. Dakota, where are we going to be traveling to today?
We're in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, looking at the murder of Darlene Vandergiesen.
This week's recommendation comes from Ashlyn at Ashlyn_E25 on TikTok. Ashlyn asked us to cover her home state of South Dakota. A big thank you to Ashlyn for this week's recommendation, as well as a continued thank you to all of our listeners for the continued support. If you have not already, be sure to follow us on TikTok, where you can suggest cases, states, ask questions, or drop us a comment. This week, we're going to be departing from Shelby County, Alabama, and we're going to be heading to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Shelby, Alabama to Sioux Falls, South Dakota makes for a 16-hour, 1,093-mile fictitious drive. And this week, we will be discussing the case of Darlene Vandergiesen. Is that it? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
All right. One for one. As we always do before jumping into this week's case, let's take a moment to learn a little bit about the state we are visiting, as well as some notorious murders from the state of South Dakota. South Dakota. For some reason, Dakota, I find nicknames pretty fascinating. You know, we've done this show, we're 17 in now. I really like the nicknames for serial killers. We had the Weepy Voice Killer, we had the Fast Food Killer. I'm sure we had some other cool nicknames that I'm missing, that I'm not thinking of right now. You got any that you like thus far, other than the ones I mentioned?
You
It,
said, what did you say? Fast food,
we had the Fast Food Killer, the Weepy Voice
weepy.
Killer.
Damn it, the law guy. What was that dude's name? He changed his name to us. Oh, low tax. Oh,
Oh
low
yeah, Low
tax.
Tax. Shout out
Yeah, I
to our
like
guy
that
Low
one.
Tax. I appreciate that. That's pretty dope. So I like nicknames, and I'm always kind of fascinated by the state nicknames as well. You know, we live in Ohio, we're the Buckeye State. I think that's pretty cool. We've had some states that are named after their bird, like Alabama. We had the Yellowhammer. We have some states that are named after their flower, like Kansas was the Sunflower State. Sometimes they're cool, sometimes they're boring. This week was pretty interesting. It's just the Mount Rushmore State. You know, obviously, we like to talk about things to do, places to see. I mean, places to see. It's you got to go to Mount Rushmore. I mean, you're in South Dakota, you're in the Mount Rushmore State. Thought that was kind of interesting. It's just straight to it. Like, hey, this is what it is. This is what we're known for. This is what we got. So
This is all we got to offer.
I thought that it was kind of cool because not only are they just straight up the Mount Rushmore State, but they actually had a long list of previous nicknames. So they were formerly known as the Sunshine State, the Coyote State, the Artesian State, the Blizzard State, the Land of Plenty, and lastly, the Land of Infinite Variety. So, I mean, they definitely have some really cool nicknames, but for some reason, they decided to just stick on the Mount Rushmore State. That's where we're going to be at this week, Mount Rushmore State of South Dakota. And as always, I'm going to throw on the state flags for our TikToks. I'm a big fan of the state flags. And again, Dakota, if you're looking at this, it's just South Dakota, the Mount Rushmore state. It's even on their state flag. Well, what are we thinking on this state flag? A scale of 1 to 10. What do we got this week for Dakota's grade?
Oh, man, that is hard to see. Can't tell what's all going. Is that I like the seal, the state seal. That's
Yeah, the
pretty
seal's
cool.
really cool. So the middle of the flag is just a seal, and then it's just surrounded by South Dakota, the Mount Rushmore state.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like it then.
Oh, okay, all right, cool. We got a pretty solid grade then. Okay. South Dakota's murder per capita, they're actually 30th in murder per capita. So, you know, when you go to South Dakota, I feel like you can breathe a little easier. You know, you can rest. You don't have to have your head on a swivel. They have 5.3 murders per
It's
100,000 people.
still halfway. I expected a lot lower than that with
Yeah,
how hard it was to find murders in that state.
yeah, actually, I agree with you. 30th is pretty solid, but I actually thought it was going to be lower on the scale than just that. So, yeah, I'll agree with you. Kind of surprising. As far as geographic location, they're listed as Midwest. I think that's pretty accurate. I almost be willing to say Central North. So basically, it's under or I'm sorry, it's under North Dakota. Obviously, it's above Nebraska, To the left is Wyoming and Montana. To the right is Minnesota and Iowa. So you're pretty dead smack. I thought this was kind of interesting. There's a location in South Dakota that is geographically listed as the dead center of America prior to Alaska and Hawaii joining the United States. But after they added those two states, it's no longer the center of America. So it used to be the center of America. Take that for what you
Used
will.
to be.
People change, states change. How about some interesting facts? This one I thought was extremely interesting. I had to like fact check this one. I had to check like five different sources to make sure this was accurate because I thought there's no way. But South Dakota has more shoreline than the state of Florida. So, Dakota, if you're looking at a map, I mean, Florida is a peninsula. Three sides is just surrounded by water. And if you look at South Dakota, they're gridlocked. I mean, they're just surrounded by land. So I thought this one just did not sound right, but it's the land of infinite variety, as we've mentioned. It's one of their previous state nicknames, and they just have so many different rivers and lakes, sources of water that, in fact, they actually have more shoreline than the state of Florida.
Yeah, I'm looking it up because what the hell?
Doesn't seem right, does it?
So
It
it's just
seems,
rivers.
yeah, just hella
Okay.
rivers, lakes, bodies of water. Could be ponds. I don't know, creeks, just any source of water whatsoever. I mean, there's just more shoreline in South Dakota than Florida. So
Okay.
very interesting. Continuing with geography, South Dakota claims the highest point of elevation in the United States east of the Rocky Mountains. And you can find this at Black Elk Peak. It isn't just the highest point in South Dakota. At 7,242 feet, it's the highest elevation point between the Rocky Mountains to the west and the Pyrenees Mountains of France to the east. Black Elk Peak is located in the Black Hills National Park. I don't have this mentioned, but obviously Black Hills National Park is somewhere I would say is a place to see if you are in South Dakota. Lastly, South Dakota is one of the most densely populated states in America. And this probably goes back to what you were just mentioning as far as murder per capita. Kind of surprised it was only 30th because when I was reading this, they rank 46th out of all 50 states for population density. And what I mean by that, so for comparison, New Jersey is the number one state in America for population density. What that means is they average 1,283 people per every single square mile. So wherever you're at in New Jersey, you're dead center within the square mile that you're at. There's probably about 1,200 people in that same square mile as you. I feel like that's a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
So South Dakota, they're 46th in population density. They average 11 people per square mile. So wherever you're at,
Okay. So,
look at a mile around you, there's going to be
all
11
right. So
people.
people just aren't around other people.
Right. It's just so dense and spread out. It's a bigger state, and there's just no one out there. They have less than a million people in the entire state. So it's a very low populated area. And that could be a positive if you aren't into being around other people. Maybe you don't like the big cities, the hustle and bustle that you could find in New York, New Jersey. You go somewhere like South Dakota, pretty chill, not a lot going on. We'll transfer over to things to do, places to see. South Dakota. Obviously, Mount Rushmore is going to be the number one attraction when you're visiting the Mount Rushmore state. This should come as no surprise. I did want to take some time out here to just talk about my trip that I went on last year. Last summer, I was with a group of friends who took a road trip out west. We rented an RV, and the plan was to drive out to Montana. This is a trip that I'm sure I'll probably reference in the future as it was a pretty monumental moment in my life. It made me realize that traveling was really something I wanted to do and kind of played a big part in this podcast that we're doing. And traveling in an RV from our home here in Ohio to Montana, there's obviously states you got to pass through, but South Dakota was one of them. And we knew that Mount Rushmore was in South Dakota. So we highlighted as our first legit stop to kind of just check it out and see it in person. Dakota, I do want to go on record by saying that I had like little, probably no interest whatsoever in seeing this in real life. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I guess I just feel like it's one of those things where I've seen it on TV, I've seen pictures of it, I've seen videos of it, and it just kind of seems like one of those things where like if you've already seen it on camera, it probably isn't going to be much different. I don't know. I would say that the great thing about travel and seeing things for yourself is you get to realize how wrong that idea can be sometimes. So I want to say Mount Rushmore ended up just being an awesome experience. It I feel like it kind of just has you in awe upon seeing it. I don't think you really grasp like how large it is. Like the faces are just huge and they're just so accurate. I mean, it's a mountain. It's literally just a mountain with faces in it, but it's just so awesome. So I mean, I know we like to go to you at the end and you kind of give us our ranking. Don't spoil anything just yet, but I mean, has Mount Rushmore ever been on your bucket list of things you'd like to see someday, or you kind of feel like I did?
Yeah, of course. It's a big history in our country, so yeah, I'd like to see it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so
And you mentioned real life is a lot different than on video. We went to DC. It was completely different than anything we've ever seen on TV. Like the Washington Monument was a lot bigger than I expected. The pool, the White House. I didn't know that this whole time all the famous pictures were actually the back of the White House.
right,
So
right.
that was a surprise. So yeah, some things you just got to see in person.
Yeah, exactly. That's 100% spot on. I would highly recommend checking out the Mount Rushmore in everyone's life at least once. I will say, I'll go on record saying that I think it's one of those things where once you have seen it once, I don't really know as if you ever like need to go back for it again. I think once is pretty solid, but it is worth seeing it that first time. It is really awesome. So I thought it was an overrated thing prior to seeing it. And once I saw it, realized how cool it was. Without turning this into a history lesson, Dakota, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot more in the Mount Rushmore state than Mount Rushmore. So really, I'm just gonna spend a little bit of time talking about Mount Rushmore a little bit. The project itself, it was taken on by a Danish American sculptor. I'm gonna take a swing at this one, Gutzen Borglum. I feel like that's probably pretty close to not 100% accurate. So we'll go with Borglum. He's the Danish American sculptor who took on this project. He was originally working on a project in Stone Mountain, which is in Georgia, but he wanted out. He knew that this project that he was working on, he kind of was on record saying like he knew it wasn't going to pan out. The mountain itself just wasn't made for what they were trying to do. He wanted out and he got asked to do this project. So he pretty much just left that project behind, jumped over to this one in South Dakota. The carving started in 1927 and was completed in 1941. So overall, this project took 14 years. It was done by a team of over 400 men. And surprisingly, zero deaths tallied on this project. So, Dakota, I think back to like the 1930s, 1940s, there wasn't OSHA running around making sure that everyone was being safe, wearing their hard hats and locked in appropriately and properly. I feel like it wasn't like out of the normal for people to just die on the job back in the old days. So I think it's pretty cool that no one died doing this.
Came with the job, dying.
Yeah. This by far is the most surprising stat or fact you could call it for Mount Rushmore. Overall, the project total cost $989,000. I mean, that's just insane. I feel like any project today, like it's exceeding $1 million by a long shot. So the fact that 400 men, 14 years, carving 600-foot faces into a side of a mountain, working with explosions and C4 and dynamite, didn't even tally up to $1 million. Pretty
Well,
fascinating,
that
I would
that
say.
comes out to almost 18 million now.
Okay. Well, I guess that makes sense. So I threw this next one in here for you, Dakota. So Borglum was secretly working on a Hall of Records that was going to be behind the heads in Mount Rushmore. This Hall of Records was intended to be a vault where America would then keep its most precious documents, such as the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence. And, anyways, the Congress found out that our guy was just doing this secret project, and he demanded that he use federal funds for the faces and not the hall in the back. He said, don't be doing that anymore. That's weird that you're doing that. Just stick to what you're originally doing. And in 1998, the intentions of the hall were actually discovered along with images and text from Borglum himself in a sealed vault inside of the unfinished area. Now, Dakota, I know that you love the movie National Treasure with Nick Cage. I know you like the concept of treasure hunts, and Mount Rushmore is actually featured in the movie. There is a concept making it one of the focal points in this movie, and it's because of this secret hall that they were building behind these heads. I thought that was kind of cool. There's actually even been like rumors potentially that maybe there is some sort of hidden treasure at Mount
The
Rushmore,
city of gold.
the city of gold. So I thought that was really cool. I've been there. I actually don't know this personally. I know there's like trails and stuff. I don't think you can actually get on top of Mount Rushmore, obviously. I mean, so I don't know how they ever found that to begin with. But nonetheless, if you ever find yourself on top, there's supposedly a hidden little vault back there. The idea of creating a sculpture of some sort was thought of by South Dakota historian Dwayne Robinson. So his hopes was to come up with a way to attract tourists to his state. You know, South Dakota, it's there's not a lot to do, like we were just saying at the top of this episode. So how can we get people to come to my state? He thought of Mount Rushmore, and it's been a success. Mount Rushmore is visited by 3 million people a year. I would go as far as adding this to the places to see. Hey, Dakota, have you ever heard of the Crazy Horse Memorial?
No.
Okay, so I never heard of this prior to traveling there. And then, we drove by it, and my friend that we were going with, Jaron, he's more familiar with out there. It's where he's from. It was from Montana, but he's aware of the whole area. So the Crazy Horse Memorial, it's like another mountain statue that is being worked on. The Borglums did hire one specific artist. I'm not even going to try his name. But, anyways, Borglum and this artist got into a beef while working on Mount Rushmore. So after 19 days, this other artist, he said, like, I'm leaving this project. I don't want to work on Mount Rushmore. You guys suck. And then he went off and started his own thing, carving the Crazy Horse Memorial. Crazy Horse is a famous Sioux Indian chief. And basically, same concept. They were just working on his face and a body. As of today, it's the world's largest mountain sculpture in progress. It's been in progress since 1947, but it's still not done. So it's believed that they're never going to finish it. You can see it. It's on display. It's still pretty cool for the most part, what you can see. I don't have a photo on here, but you can always look it up. It's pretty cool. So that's the Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse Memorial. If you're into faces on
Yeah, this thing's
mountains.
never getting finished.
No, it's huge.
It's just the face that's done.
Yeah, it's a huge sculpture, but it's not getting done. So at the top of the show, I made a mention that this week's state of South Dakota was requested by Ashland. And I like to reply and ask people if there's anywhere in their state that they want us to specifically reference or look into. And Ashland made mention of Rapid City. And I thought this was pretty cool because I actually had the chance to spend an evening in Rapid City while we were in South Dakota. It was a pretty cool place. It was sort of like a Wild West type of vibe. We did dinner at a saloon. There's like a bunch of different bars and cool shops. It just had that Wild West feel. It's like one of their bigger cities, but again, it's just so, you know, densely populated. So I would go as far as even saying it had like a small town vibe. Rapid City was a really neat spot. We were able to camp out there for the night. And another place that I would recommend places to see is located in Rapid City, and that's the Cosmos Mystery Area. I'm not really even sure how to explain this place. If I had to, I'd say it's just a place where the gravity just doesn't really make sense. So you walk through this place and it looks like buildings are going downhill, but they're actually level. You could be standing in the corner of a room and you look like you're like fully leaned over, but really you're standing straight up. There's ramps where you put a tennis ball down and it appears as though the ball is rolling up. And there's even like this water jug they have where you like pour out the water on a cup and the water will like appear to go uphill and fall down. Obviously, we know water doesn't run uphill. So, for whatever reason, It looks like it's going uphill, but we know it's not. And then there's like trees outside that are growing, and then they grow like this. So it's like gravity's almost like pulling them down. I don't know how to explain it other than just I'll post the photos on our TikTok, Dakota. I'm sure you can see them now. It's a really interesting place, and it's like you leave and you kind of feel weird, like you must feel like off balance, I guess. So it's definitely a really cool spot. I think it's a place that you would personally like a lot if you were ever there. It was really cool to check out. Last thing for me, some other notable places. I have to throw in Badlands National Park. I didn't get to personally check this out. We were only there for a day, but it's towards the top of their list for attractions. It's just a bunch of drastic landscapes that are naturally formed from erosion of clay and sand. So outside of these natural landscapes, you have wildlife like buffalo, and it kind of looks like, if I had to say, Dakota, I'd say it's like a mini Grand Canyon. Would
Yeah,
you
it's
agree with
exactly
that?
what it looks like.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That is some interesting facts about South Dakota, some places to see, some things to do. Basically, you're going to South Dakota for Mount Rushmore. You're going to the Mount Rushmore State for Mount Rushmore. Before I throw it over to you to cover some South Dakota famous murders, without looking at the picture, who are the four people on Mount Rushmore? Give it to us.
Washington is up there, right?
Yep.
Uh, Lincoln.
Yep.
Is Jefferson on there?
Yep.
And I'll say Adams.
Ooh. You want to try one more, or is that it? One of your favorite presidents?
Oh man, I don't. Damn, I
Oh,
should know this.
you should. I'm honestly disappointed you don't. Old Theodore Roosevelt.
Okay, I
All
was
right.
thinking older.
Hey, those are the four faces you'll see when you go see Mount Rushmore. So check it out: Mount Rushmore, Cosmos, Rapid City, and Badlands National Park. Beyond that, Dakota, we always got to dive into some infamous murders. We're a murder podcast. So I see you got three South Dakota murders for us. You said that it was kind of hard to find some murders this week, right?
Yeah, it was really hard to find murders in South Dakota. As you mentioned, the density. I don't know if people like people more since they don't have to be around a bunch of people out there, or they just
Yeah.
can't find people to kill. But yeah, it was very hard. A lot of this stuff was back in the day, like around the time that Mount Rushmore was built. Like John Dillinger, famous criminal. He was the most wanted man in America at one point. He robbed some banks in the city we're in today, Sioux Falls. Um, there was one criminal that there's no serial killers from the state, but he claimed to have killed like 30 something people. None of them could be proven. Those were all like robberies and stuff. So it wasn't, I don't know if he was seeking people out to kill, but not your typical serial killer. But I do have a couple of people that I want to go over. Um, First, the most infamous case to ever happen in the state of South Dakota was the disappearance of Piper Trail. I believe that is. She was a 28-year-old mother who was kidnapped from her home, and just 3 days earlier, a strange man appeared at her doorstep. His name was Robert Leroy Anderson. He was trying to get her kids to go to a church camp. Now,
Oh,
they knew
nice.
his name after he left because he wrote it down during his visit. He was charged with her kidnap and murder, even though her body was never found. In the process, he was found guilty of another woman's murder. He was set to be the first person in 50 years to be executed in South Dakota, but before he was able to be executed, he was found hanging in his jail cell.
Oh, yikes. Wonder if he really did it. Did he kill himself? You know, who knows? We'll never
Uh,
know.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Strange case.
Strange case. All right, what do we got next?
Instead, our next killer brought back executions in South Dakota.
Oh, bringing
Elijah
executions
Page.
back.
Elijah Page, along with two friends, kidnapped a 19-year-old and tortured him for 3 hours before killing him. The two accomplices, Briley Piper and Darrell Hoadley, were sentenced to life, while Page was killed via lethal injection in 2006. making it the first execution in the state since 1947. Now, 1947, that execution comes to our next guy, George Sitz. He was the only person in South Dakota history to have more than two victims that were confirmed. He was a convicted cop killer who started his reign of terror by killing a grocery store clerk before killing a sheriff. And then he ended up escaping from prison, and an FBI agent who attempted to capture him, he killed him also. So he had three
Oh,
confirmed kills. And he ended up being the only person to be executed via electric chair in South Dakota's history.
wow. Okay. Pretty interesting people we got here in South Dakota. So it's just there's just not a lot of murders going on, which is a good thing. Again, you could add that to the list of positives. Out of all of
No,
our
we got one person that had more than two kills. And
out of all of our states so far, this is 17 in. Is this the hardest state you've had to find serial killers or murderers thus far, or was there a state more difficult than
couldn't
this?
find any serial killers, but uh no, I think Rhode Island was harder.
Yeah, Rhode Island was just really tough. Okay. All right, so that's some things to do, places to see, some interesting facts, and infamous murder cases from the state of South Dakota that we're in this week. And as always, Dakota, it's a murder podcast, so we got our own personal murder case of the week, and that's going to be the case of Darlene Vandergiesen. 2 for 2 on that one. I'm going to throw it back to you and let you kick off our case of the week.
It's Geeson.
1 for 2. Okay, Geeson. All right, 1 for 2. All right, here we go.
So normally our cases start off with a loved one reporting someone missing, but this one's a little different. After 2 days of no call, no shows from Darlene Vandergiesen's management at JDS Industries, is like a company that made sport trophies. They became worried that one of their best employees wasn't showing up for work. So her boss ended up reaching out to her parents, Eugene and Dolores, to let them know that their daughter had not been coming to work and that they were worried for her. So Eugene and Dolores went to Darlene's apartment to check up on her. As they had their own key, they were able to get in. First thing that worried them was the cell phone of Darlene that was sitting on the dining room table. Now, this cell phone never left Darlene's side. The reason for that and why this is so significant, because she was deaf. The cell phone is a very important means of communications through text messages, IMs, all that for someone who's deaf. So records were pulled from the phone, and they indicate that the phone had not been used in the 2 days that she had not been showing up to work.
Despite her disappearance, there were no indications whatsoever that there was foul play. No signs of forced entries. Nothing was really out of place, and it was a pretty clean setup overall. Later in the day, police received a call from a local Pizza Hut that there was an abandoned truck in their parking lot for the last couple of days. It almost kind of took me back to the Ohio episode where we had the abandoned car. Police just kind of said, we'll get to it later. But this, in fact, they were like, okay, we'll come check it out. There's not a lot to do in South Dakota, not a lot of stuff going on. So they had time to check this car out at Pizza Hut. After a quick scan, it was confirmed to be Darlene's vehicle. Hoping for clues as to who she might have been with, police questioned employees. None of them had seen her inside of the restaurant. With no suspects and no actual evidence of a crime, police had to look further into Darlene's life to understand what exactly happened to her. Phone records didn't show much, but they took her computer in for examination as she used it a lot, and her parents were worried she may have met someone online that could have abducted her.
Yeah, her mom was always worried that she was going to meet a man online and he was going to kidnap her. So a deep search of the computer revealed a lot of her personal life, but some emails 10 days prior to her disappearance are what caught investigators' eyes. A couple emails from a woman named Wendy Smith telling Darlene that she hated her, among other things that were found. But the grammar was a little off, so it looked like a little kid wrote these, or perhaps another deaf person, because someone who's not able to hear how a language is spoken cannot fully piece it together. The internet search also revealed Darlene had been dating someone by the name of Jeff Flynn. Police showed up to his apartment, and that was over an hour away from where Darlene lived, but he too was missing. None of his family, friends had seen him for over 2 days, same amount of time that Darlene was missing. It was very unusual for him to stay out of contact for that long.
So now we have two people that were missing and no clues as to where they have gone or if they were even together. 4 days later, though, Jeff appeared out of nowhere at home. He claims to have been with friends on a little getaway when he was brought in for questioning. Investigators started doing a search on his apartment and car where they found evidence of dried blood in the trunk. The samples were taken to the lab where it was proven to not be Darlene's, but instead deer blood. Jeff's alibi had checked out and he was crossed off the suspect list. This just left one clue for police, and that was the hateful emails sent from a Wendy Wright. A subpoena to Yahoo allowed them to track the emails to a house nearby. That house belonged to a deaf woman by the name of Daphne Wright.
Daphne had no prior run-ins with police, and she denied any involvement in Darlene's disappearance. At first, she even denied sending the emails, but then after being told that the subpoena revealed the sender's location, she kind of gave in and said she did. A deeper dive into Daphne showed that there was an altercation 5 days before the disappearance that was at a restaurant and ended in a police call. She had gotten into it with Darlene because she walked in and saw that Darlene was with her ex-girlfriend, Sally Ford, and became jealous, causing a scene before police forced her to leave. Turns out Darlene was not in a relationship with the woman, and in fact, she was not a lesbian at all. Still, Daphne believed that they were together and told police this during her interrogation.
Okay, so they're not together in a relationship. One thought they were, and the other one was saying, no, that's not the case.
Sally's Daphne's ex, and she walked in, saw Sally with Darlene, so she flipped out on her, thinking that Darlene was getting in between Daphne and her ex-girlfriend.
Okay, interesting. All right, so anyways, to continue on, police obtained a search warrant for Daphne's house, where they found some very troubling things. First, the trash can included chainsaw oil and a receipt for a chainsaw in the middle of winter. Despite this, there was no chainsaw found on the property. The basement had a strong smell of cleaning solution and was recently painted. But the paint wasn't just on the walls, but it was on the floor too. And it wasn't consistent. One spot would have a small paint spot and another would have a big spot. The walls were only partially painted. Then a room was discovered where the whole room, including the floor, had been completely painted blue and was still fresh.
Further look into the walls, investigators found blood and bone remains like deep into the crevices. So they took them in to match, and it was in fact a match with Darlene's DNA. Still, they did not have a body, though, making it hard to convict her. They need to find some evidence of a body to shut this case. The trash had already been taken to a landfill, launching a huge search there. In freezing cold temperatures, it took 5 days before they eventually caught a break. The legs of a woman were found along with an American Sign Language sweatshirt. The blood on it ended up being a match to Darlene's, but there was another person's DNA on the inside, and that matched Daphne's DNA, leading to her arrest.
The rest of Darlene's body and head were found across state lines in Minnesota, allowing a cause of death to be determined. There was blunt force trauma to her head, along with cord marks matching fibers from one found in Daphne's basement. Daphne was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
So they actually weren't able to determine which one killed her. It could have been either one. The
Could have been
blunt
either or
force
both.
trauma cracked her skull, and then the cord marks were on her neck. So just as I did last week, I wanted to get into more of the graphic details.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to paint a
Okay.
picture of what really happened.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So just a little disclaimer to everyone. This is more so for gore fans, I guess.
Ooh, adults only.
Yeah. So after the fight at the restaurant, Daphne ended up apologizing and wanted to make it up to Darlene. She invited her out to a Pizza Hut, but when they arrived, they decided not to go in, but instead to go back to Daphne's house for dinner.
Oh, Netflix and chill.
Upon entering the house, Daphne was struck in the head with a hard object, knocking her out. Her body was then dragged down the steps before having her head covered with a bag and then wrapped tightly with a cord. This is when the chainsaw that was purchased was used to dismember her body. The lower half was thrown in the trash, and then the upper half was dumped in the ditch in Minnesota to throw people off. Now, this was all done because Daphne believed that Darlene was trying to steal Sally away. It was jealous, so she just had to get rid of the problem.
Wow, what a yikes! That's crazy. And basically, like you were saying, essentially killed her for no reason too.
Yeah, she didn't know that she wasn't lesbian.
Yeah, that's jeez, crazy.
Hey,
Might take
and something I want to include on the TikTok. I'll send it over to you.
okay.
The crime scene photos. When you were talking about the paint on the walls,
Yeah, yeah.
this shit was insane. Like it looked like a serial killer's lair. Like there was just paint in random spots, and then the one room was just completely blue. The floor, ceiling, the walls. It's disturbing.
Interesting. Yeah, send those over. I'll be sure to include that in the TikTok. One of my, I guess I like listening to these stories as we talk about them, and then I kind of have like some takeaways or some questions. And one thing I was thinking about in this one, and it's not just this case. I've heard this plenty of cases where you kind of have to find the body in order to really convict someone. It's not always necessary. I mean, I think even in our murders up top, I think you had one where a body wasn't found, but they still were able
Yeah.
to convict.
Kelly from Colorado. Her body was never found.
Yeah. So this one, I just feel like it. Do you find that somewhat strange? I guess like the fact that you can find DNA reflecting blood and you said bone fragments were inside of the wall, like in the crevices. I almost feel like I'm not so sure a body is necessary at that point. I bone
No,
bone like
no.
I
There were bones, tissue. Yeah, that
yeah I
it was
get
all right there
blood.
in the wall.
I understand blood. I mean, someone could have a nosebleed in theory and then like still be walking around. You don't know if they're murdered just because there's blood. I mean, I get that, but man, bone fragments in the crevices of the wall. I feel like I'm not so sure. I don't know if a body necessarily is needed at that point, but I mean, I get it though. I mean, it definitely helps the case. But I kind of thought that was interesting that they were able to find bone and they were still like, no, we need a body. But either way, as we said, the body was located and she's doing in prison for life as she should. Homegirl got a chainsaw and just cut it all up. She's probably in the right place. She's where
Yeah,
she should be.
something interesting. She did get life, but she was up for the death penalty.
Okay.
And there's never been a woman in South Dakota history that was put on death row. So
Okay. If
yeah,
there,
and with them, they have to have a unanimous vote, and there were I'm not sure how many total, but there were two jurors that just didn't want to. I don't know if they didn't want to put her on there or a woman on death. I don't know. It was kind
sure.
of weird, but yeah, she almost became the first woman to die via lethal
Well,
injection in South Dakota.
it sounds like if there ever was a first, she would have been a really good candidate for that. So, all right, interesting. Okay, so as we wrap it up, Dakota, I always like to throw it back to you. That was, we went over some places to see, things to do. This is a state that, like, oddly is kind of special to me. I took my road trip and we landed here for a whole day, and like I said, it kind of opened my eyes to even if you've seen pictures and videos, it's a lot of times things are still worth seeing in real life. Mount Rushmore was really awesome. It's a state where before going, if you asked me the same question, I feel like South Dakota probably would have been like 50, 49, 48. And I don't want to sway your opinion here. I don't want to mess up the legitimacy of your poll here, your rankings. So don't listen to me, but I just know prior to going, it would have been at the absolute bottom because I don't know a lot about South Dakota. After going, I mean, it was really cool. I would definitely have it in my it'd be in my top 20 for sure. That's just me personally. Again, it's just my own personal opinion. But I'm curious to throw it back to you, someone who's never been there. Um, the Mount Rushmore State. What'd you think about it? What's some takeaways that you had, and ultimately, where are you putting this on your list?
Well, my takeaway is you talk about it having a special place in your heart, but in reality, you didn't sell this state at all to me. You talked about Mount Rushmore for about 10, 15 minutes, and it's not worth going to a state to see one thing. So you didn't help the case here. I gotta say your presentation made me lower my ranking.
Oh no. Oh
Yeah,
no.
so I was probably top 20 with it until I realized all you can go see is Mount Rushmore.
Okay, but we had some you had Cosmos. Rapid City was pretty cool. Some Wild West, and don't forget about the Badlands. Badlands is cool. And you got the highest elevation between here and France. That's pretty sweet. I mean, we had a couple other things in there going on. Come on now. Hey,
I'm gonna say 24 now.
24. Okay, I'll take that. 24 is
Yeah.
cool. 24 is cool. That's not bad. Not bad. Okay. All right. 24. We'll take that.
Yeah, so people like love making dad jokes. One of the jokes I always got when I was younger was north or south when I
Oh,
would tell them my name.
yes. Does
So I
that
would
make
always tell them South Dakota. So
does that make you want to go more or less? Does it like do you have like a instilled hate to it because of your name
no,
or
I feel like I have an obligation to at least go through South Dakota
yeah, it's
since
almost
I
like the
said that.
motherland in a way, you know? I feel like it's a necessity at this point.
I guess.
You have to go through Dakotas in a Dodge Dakota. That's the
Wow.
only way to do it. Dakota traveling through Dakota in a Dakota. That's pretty cool, man. We'll leave it at that. As we begin our departure from the state of South Dakota, in conclusion of episode 17 of 50 States, 50 Murders, we want to continue to thank you, the listener, for tuning in. Also, a big thank you to Ashlyn for recommending the state of South Dakota. Each and every week, we will continue covering a new state as well as a murder case that happened to take place there.
If you're not ready, please be sure to follow and subscribe and tune in next week for episode 18.